section of the session, we'll give mic rights to all of the team leads who will be speaking on behalf of their team. And just make sure your speakers are on and your volume is up. As always, if you want to talk about today's session on social media, feel free to use the hashtag XAPI Cohort, tag the XAPI Gnome. You can also tag our presenter today, Duncan, and his organization that he works for, RISC, and you can also tag Torrance Learning. My mic is very hot. Can you hear me better now, Brian? So we're gonna, I hope that folks can hear me, or is my mic very, loud, high? Is that okay? So on today's schedule, we have case studies, and Duncan is going to be sharing out 4 solutions using XAPI. So it's a very practical example of how you can be using XAPI. And then we'll do our cohort business and team check-ins. I am excited to say that we are at 470 folks registered for cohort. So we're still continuing to grow. And what that means for you and teams is that folks might be joining your teams. And we want to make sure that they can, if they want to, they can hop right in, or they can continue just to observe and get their feet wet with cohort. But folks are still joining cohort, and that's great, and we're glad to see them. Behind the mics today is myself, Jessica Jackson, and Jamie Washington is our producer today. So thank you, Jamie, for helping us stay on task and have the cohort run smoothly today. So we've spent about 7 weeks talking about XAPI. We started really broad. We talked about what it means to be a part of this learning experience, what it meant to be a part of cohort, and what XAPI generally is. Then we got into how to use it with e-learning tools, how to use it, how to use the specification with things that are outside of e-learning, how to use profiles, understanding the new learning ecosystem, and how to, and then last week we talked about the adoption, the state of adoption, and what it looks like in the industry. Now for the next few weeks, so 4 weeks, we have case studies where folks from the industry will be presenting out on practical solutions that they've used XAPI for, and then we'll get into project team demos where each team will have an opportunity to present out on the work that they've been doing in cohort. These team demos do not need to be perfect or even finished. It's just an opportunity to do some soundboarding, to present out, and get some feedback from the cohort. Then finally, we have the XAPI party and the download in May. These are available both virtually and in person in Chelsea. And at the end of this presentation, I'll share out the link on how to register for the XAPI party. All right, with that, I'm going to pass over the mic to Duncan, who's going to share out 4 case studies that he's used in his practice. So thank you, Duncan, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
All righty, thank you. I've unmuted now, so if anyone has trouble hearing me or I'm hot on the mic, let me know. Glad to join the cohort again. Need to do this fairly regularly, both on the the webinar is going through on the weekly side as well as the party. So if you've not done a download and party, then I highly recommend those. I even go to Michigan in December to catch them. So for those of you that I don't know, my name is Duncan Welder. My contact information here, I work for RISC down in Houston. So we've been involved with XAPI really since, I guess, the kind of 2000, well, let's say really since the 9.0 version came out with the tin can shootouts before we actually had a spec online there. And what I was going to do today is, like Jessica mentioned, is really go through at a high level some quick case studies. And these are all things that I think work well from a finding new project standpoint, because in each of these cases, well, I'll say for sure in 3 of the 4 cases, there was never a mention of doing something with XAPI going into um, the individual case study, right? So there was a problem or some kind of challenge that a group came to us with, and said, all right, how are we going to fix this? And what happened is ultimately um, the solution required XAPI. XAPI was built into the solution, but it wasn't really a driver. It wasn't something that started us out, moving towards towards XAPI, and certainly something that the clients, by and large, were not you know not necessarily interested in, not necessarily interested in the plumbing, really just how those functions needed to um, still needed to be done. So again, I look at it, especially from a selling XAPI internally standpoint, or to an organization. The main thing to do is not to talk about XAPI, right? I think for by and large, there's a solution out there that utilizes this technology and it makes it easier to work with. But um, the the idea of selling XAPI for XAPI's sake to me is a hard one. So, first case study that I want to talk about is a group with a distributed workforce. They're a field services kind of organization, so they're inside refineries and chemical plants and drilling operations, providing a lot of industrial services. So about 6,000 employees. One of their real drivers for enhancing, changing the way they were doing training, is employee retention. So not necessarily learning retention as a driver, but in their case, they had plenty of people that in a highly competitive workforce would move over to new jobs outside the organization. So what they wanted to do um, was to enhance the way that they were doing training and having a very mobile first delivery method where they wanted specifically to text out um, uh, content, from a spaced learning or a micro learning standpoint. And what they needed to do was get these small repetitive learning experiences out, separate those out over time, to reinforce that previous information, to build new information on top of that, right? Because these are all things that are proven to improve learning retention as opposed to employee retention. So wanted to get these things out in front of employees where they were working at the time, and again, to do that, really wanted to get out with something that was mobile friendly, and that content development was done using RISC. So they built content modules there, and the reason that XAPI came into play was really for a delivery and authentication standpoint. SCORM, as you guys know, really requires me to have a live connection to an LMS, right, to maintain communications there. There are some workarounds that allow some offline play, but generally those are custom built or they're tool specific, which limits their interoperability. So what we looked at was if we have a CMI5 or an XAPI package, right? The XAPI publish option from RISE. In this case, what we could do is when we send out a text message, we could embed a token that identifies the actor. So everyone gets a unique link that includes say an embedded token that identifies who's accessing that training. Then we have a couple different ways of timing those pieces out. This is something we can do inside a full-blown LMS. But in this case, this group already had a different LMS and didn't have a need for that kind of functionality. So we just have a lighter front end, a little, I guess, learning experience platform that will let me set up a series of modules and the time between those, handle email templates and those kind of things. So the notifications are going out by text message primarily. There are some folks that opt out, of course, and they'll get those messages by email. That's the backup method, and then the follow-ups will happen again to the student via text message or email, and then to their administrators through reports. So again, instead of having to build something from scratch, we could take really existing technology there, and because we're using XAPI in this case, we can help deliver that training offline for those folks. And from a process standpoint, essentially the LMS or the LXP or the space learning platform, whatever I'd like to call it, is going to decide when that message needs to go out. It goes out to a mailer program that bounces out to the learner. That person then is interacting with that content, which is reading and writing data to the LRS, and then ultimately the LMS and LRS are talking to each other so that the LMS just has to sit there and wait for a completion record to come back in. And again, it lets them run through and bypass ever having to log into an LMS, which was part of their remit up front as well, is that every employee hated the LMS and they wanted to bypass it altogether and don't let them see it when we get to this content. But of course, it still all has to be recorded, so provides its own challenge there. But again, good case where we had a need established. I want to send text messages out with this content to our students out over time, and how do we do it? And the solution really was XAPI there. The next case study that I wanted to take a look at was around tracking forums, threaded discussion groups, and conceptually had a model where we have three different kinds of discussion groups. There are open forums, right, where I could post a topic and people could post other topics and I could respond, and you could vote up or you could vote down, and your standard functions there. But then there's also forums that are associated with courses, right? So everyone that's in a course may have the same questions that are being posed to them, and they work together in small groups, or what I think of as more alumni groups, where people that had gone through a similar learning experience would be able to come in and participate in a forum there. So what we ultimately wanted to do was have some kind of force direction graph, like you see on the screen there, that has nodes with topics or nodes with people, and shows with the weight of a line the number of interactions that have happened there. The real challenge comes in, and this is good and easy enough to do on the XAPI side of the world. The challenge that really came into us was, how do you filter and manage those? Because I want to be able to filter by a particular supervised group, right? So if I oversee two different teams or maybe two different departments or work areas, how do I want to group those people together? And that's not necessarily data that I have inside an LRS. Now I can, right? There's our agent profile that would let me keep student information that doesn't change frequently out and use that. But in this case, I already had a data source from the LMS to get that employee demographic kind of information. So first, we really had to start thinking about vocabulary, because there wasn't a profile around forums and discussion groups at the time. So I had to know that there was a way to identify students, and it needed to be consistent so that we didn't have someone in with an employee ID and someone in with a mailbox, and have duplication across those employees. We needed some data from the LMS, like who's the supervisor and what departments or teams that person is on. And then we needed to make sure that inside every statement we could figure out where it came from, right? So, um, if I post a answer, then someone votes that up. The subject of that voting up is not the topic, but it's really the other answer. So I've got some statement references we have to be able to use to roll those things up and effectively report on them. The statements then decided some rules up front that we're going to use the account, the employee ID from the LMS, because again we had that data, and I find it a little more consistent than using email, since most of us have more than one email box. We used ADL and RISC to see verbs. I think all of those could be converted over now to ADL verbs, but at the time there were some differences still in the verb libraries there. The object IDs. So as we reference the object inside the actual XAPI statement, inside the JSON itself, we use the prime key coming from the LMS so we could track those back. And then the IRI is really getting us back to a particular customer in that case. And then for the activities, they're all nested into a set of parent activities and groups so that from a context standpoint, I can tell that this was a response to this post that was in this particular discussion group, and that's all associated with maybe the people that are in the planning for employee advancement course on June 3rd, right? So we could manage all of that context natively inside the statement. Again, from a process standpoint or an architecture standpoint, what we had is the LMS and the LRS speaking to each other, and then both writing to a reporting database so that we could go ahead and use that LMS data without converting it over to XAPI, like the department that someone worked in and the supervisors that are assigned to that person. So again, just a way to combine that data and make faster and easier querying, because one of the things that can be a bit of a struggle on the native XAPI side is being able to quickly access that LRS data, especially when you're at volume there. So kind of putting all those pieces together, we have statements that you probably cannot read, especially if you have any of the other little chat options open on the screen. But this is a case where I have a verb posted that you'll see in that first side of the screenshot. From a context standpoint, on the right side, you can see the parent activity and its grouping over there on the again on the right side. So even though you can't see this, I do have a link at the end of this presentation where you can go through and see these statements in great detail and large enough that humans could read it. The final thing here, and when I'm talking about statements and vocabulary considerations, one of the things that I think is super critical is once you've gone through this process to really document your design, and there are some templates. This template is a Word template that I believe the ADL has published for documenting how do you want your actor, how do you want your verb, what does that object need to look like, what is the result going to be if there's a result in your statement. So just for being consistent, being faithful to that governance, I like to have a good way to document those things going through, because ultimately, that's what will become an XAPI profile or a recipe if it's fully adopted. So if one already existed, I wouldn't have to go through this part. But in so many cases, especially with opportunities like this, where someone comes in and says, "Hey, I just need a solution," we decide, "Oh, well, we can use XAPI to do it." Then it's nice to have that documentation. You guys are quiet today. I haven't seen anything in the question side of the world. Um, so I I'm going to bounce over to uh, that third case study that I wanted to step through, and this is one where I actually did have the end user group, the client group that came in and said they thought that they could use XAPI for this. And what they wanted to do was the very not exciting tracking of PDF documents. And basically how many times those documents are accessed by students every day, and then so I've got to click on the arrows, not on the screen itself. And then within those documents, as they're being used, how many highlights are being made, how many underlines are being made, how many notes are being made on those documents, and then ultimately they wanted to have a dashboard where they could look at these thumbnails and see, what are all the student comments that you can't read there on the bottom of that screen capture. So at first we said, no, this is no problem. You should do this with an ebook, convert this stuff to EPUB kind of formats, and there's a lot of this native functionality that already exists there. And the problem they had was that or challenge that they had was that they had thousands of pages of content, and this is a heavily regulated environment. So this is power transmission, training. They do a lot of instructor-led classes, and these can be 6 or 8 weeks long that folks are going through. So they have this huge archive of legacy material. They had, for a long time, printed manuals, and they figured out that if they need to print out a 3-ring binder and ship it out someplace, that the cost was about $75 per binder. And then you get to the case where you realize that, oh gosh, page 55 has an error, and you've got to go back through and do some kind of update, and you got someone sitting in a hotel conference room in the middle of the night swapping out page 55 for 100 people that are going to be in class the next day. They wanted to do USBs, but there was a lot of concern with having uncontrolled content out there, and also with the security around USBs to begin with. And then there was that whole challenge that students needed to be able to mark up a document. So if I don't give you access to that document, how do you mark it up in class, make your notes, and then go back to work and still have access to those notes? So what we decided to do, and moving these guys forward, is set up an XAPI enabled PDF reader. So just based on their company parameters, we had an iPad version and a browser-based version that were available. The LMS, or the login to either of the apps, would provide you credentialing and document control, so I could only access the documents that I had been given permission for. Then the annotations are stored in the LRS. They're part of the actual XAPI statement. So one of the things that is in the XAPI specification is an LRS has to be able to receive and store an attachment. So a couple of different ways of doing that from a spec standpoint, but we could take those annotations and store them as an attachment to the LRS, to the XAPI statement in the LRS, and then when a person leaves the classroom and goes back to work, when they access that document, that what do I say, that image, that markup is laid over the top of it, so that you can see what was noted, what was highlighted, what was underlined, all those kind of things as you go through, which then provides you all that document security, but still the portability of records. So again, not the most exciting example, right? Where someone comes in and says, "Gosh, I need to be able to mark up a PDF." You say, "Okay, well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of abilities to mark up PDFs, different tools already out on the market, but how do we do it in a way that provides that portability and that security?" And XAPI was the driver for that solution. So fun project there, and one that's a little out of the box. There actually is a profile published now for PDF annotation, in addition to the EPUB standard that's out there. And bouncing into that very last, because I know that I need to get off the line with you guys after about 30 minutes and let you get into cohort reports or team reports. The last project, what I see Luke has asked to have a link to that PDF profile. I certainly should. Let me make sure that I have that for you. The last case study I wanted to talk about here is really one where the group was changing the way they operated from a training standpoint. Again, this is a heavily regulated group. These are they're doing drilling operations in North America, and from a safety standpoint, they had a ton of old content out, or legacy content out, not old, bad, or dated, but they wanted to be able to start looking at who had completed training by mastery of objective versus finishing a particular course. So they needed something like this graph, which actually is part of the end results, where I could see a series of objectives and see passed versus failed objectives. That great big long one at the top that says unknown, that's all native SCORM data. We'll talk about how we turn that long unknown bar into one of these shorter, more recognizable bars. And then they wanted the ability to drill down to the individual question level. So inside an objective, maybe one's being people are struggling with, but they want to get down to the individual questions within inside that animal. These other charts that they had in this case, they wanted some safety data on this one dashboard that includes training information at the top and more safety data at the bottom. So again, petrochemical group wanted to look at the objectives, drill down to the question level. Again, had a challenge with supervisors only needing to be able to access the training history for their employees, right? So if I don't supervise someone, I can't go down and look at the questions they've missed on a particular test or module there. And they had, again, this whole legacy of SCORM training. So, look at that. Matt has dropped in a link to what profiles on the PDF annotator. So I appreciate that. So they have all this existing SCORM content, and they didn't want to, rebuild everything from scratch. Again, kind of your basic stuff. They needed 70% to pass. They gave pretty limited item analysis, and that SCORM content didn't have any tie back to learning objectives, even though I think technically in the SCORM spec there is some mention of objectives. So what they did it's a couple things from a development side. And I don't want to gloss over this because it's a serious, heavy lifting piece of effort. But they went back through their content and they associated questions with objectives, and they updated those SCORM packages so that a test question would send a statement that included the objective for that particular question. So we started capturing with XAPI out of the SCORM content the testing information, those interactions, and the person's result, and of course their the objectives. And with that, what we did was again used a reporting database to kind of compile all of that information, and then a bunch of existing tools that they had in on hand, right? So the LRS, they are taking data and loading it to that reporting database. The LMS, they're doing the same, and they're using Microsoft Flow for that so that they can move data between systems, plus their safety management system and their incident reporting system, again, for that additional data. Again, nothing on this side is, the right-hand side of the screen is XAPI enabled. So again, kind of taking it natively and moving it over into another database. And then, because they were already Power BI users inside the organization, they're using Power BI then to build that visualization, so you could see that bar chart for the met and not met objectives, as well as the ability to drill down into those donut charts that you saw as well. So again, really just came out with, hey, this is where we want to go with training. What do we need to do? And again, don't want to minimize the instructional design work and the validation work that went in behind the scenes as well, because what really came out as a result is they were able to identify content and assessment gaps, right? Because there are places where they had objectives that weren't really being covered inside some of their content that had to be updated. I saw Luke had a question about Microsoft Flow. I am not a heavy user, so I can only speak to it in a bit. But essentially, what they're doing here is they're scheduling the movement of data between different databases using this Microsoft Flow tool, and then the Power BI is really for the visualization piece. So if someone is an MS Flow expert, glad to have you chime in with more information there, but really just getting that data in a consistent format and moving it over to a different database. So again, identifying those gaps. Then they could have subject matter experts really focus on providing feedback for failed objectives. So where they saw people with gaps, they were having really one-on-one sessions with individuals, or if there were larger groups of questions that had problems, they would offer some kind of more robust training environment there for that. Because they're publishing this data every week, it improved and made more consistent their communication around how people were interacting with training. And probably the best quote that I heard out of that whole project was one of the folks after the fact, and it's one of the supervisors that said, as we focus more and more on the analytics, it makes sense to dive into this learning data and what it can tell us, right? Because all this stuff had been happening, right? All of the safety training had been going on for years, and they have not really had the view, the line of sight down into that data in the past. So now that they do, hey, what else can we learn from? And I think these are the things and the kind of statements that help us turn the corner on the adoption of XAPI. So just a couple quick takeaway points here. As I'm looking at, how do I want to collect data? What do I want to use it for? What's valid to me? What's not? what are those sources of data that I want to use? How will I query it? Um, of course, working on any new XAPI project, the best thing to do is steal. So, are there existing uh, vocabulary libraries, existing profiles that we can use rather than creating something new? And those things that are still quite young and under ongoing revision. So, if there is something that you say, gosh, this profile gets me 85% of the way there, and there's some things that need to be changed. I know that there's work that's happening there to update those things all the time with a series of GitHub libraries. Oh, let's see. I got a question there. Was the incident reporting, the safety training, or safety data sent over by XAPI? It was not, right? Those were just kind of standard SQL database uh, systems. So instead of converting that information over to XAPI, we just used it in its raw format, and that's why the reporting database was important to combine that XAPI data and that other raw SQL data. Again, consistency with identifying things like actors and how you're going to manage those objects that are defined and named, and then grouping folks together, and ultimately documenting and being faithful to governance. And that's one of the things we talk about around the office here very often is, we spend 15 minutes writing the code to send an XAPI statement, but you spend a half day or more deciding what that statement should look like before you write the code to actually send it. So worth investing that time up front. Mentioned having a couple references there. So library, the ADL community is a practice. There's that instrumenting forums and discussion groups. That's a write-up there that gets into deeper detail as well. So wanted to share those things with you, and again, really just look at what are some of the things that, as people ask questions, hey, how do we do this? There are places where you can say, all right, we can do this, and we can do this in a interoperable way by using XAPI rather than building some kind of middleware, some kind of for-purpose tool. And again, what's the process? What are the things that you think through to help define that project?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Duncan, for those
Oh,
case
absolutely,
studies.
my pleasure always.
We're going to transition back and get right into um, cohort business. But if you have any questions or want any additional information, you had all of Duncan's contact information right there on the screen. And we will also be sharing this recording. So we're going to talk a little bit about where your team should be right now. Again, we're in week 7 of the cohort. So you are working and prototyping, developing prototypes, asking questions, digging into the details, assigning out tasks, iterating, practicing, and just strengthening your project. And I've seen lots of teams doing that. So right now, if you are a team lead who's going to give the update for your team and you are using Adobe Connect VoIP for your mic access, please raise your hand and Jamie will give you mic access. If you are called in and using the call-in number, you can press twice on your phone. You can press the asterisk twice on your phone, and that will give you mic access there. I'm going to switch over to our GitHub page to start updates. And each week, I think that this gets a little confusing because there are more teams then are present in our GitHub. So I have an alphabetical list of teams, and I still call on them to give their updates because some teams are still working, but they haven't created a GitHub yet. So I go in alphabetical order, and our first team is Team Adaptive Learning. Is anyone on the line to give the update for Team Adaptive Learning? That would be Brady or anyone else. Okay, actually, it says right there that there's no speaker this week. They started developing content and adding it to the Google Doc. They continued development on the WordPress plugin, and will use it to organize and display content. They don't have any needs right now, and they want to accomplish getting the WordPress site and plugin up and running on a server. They want to add content to the site and start testing a module, and they want to create XAPI statements to send from the module. So Team Alexa, is Izzy, are you on the line to give your update for Team Alexa?
I'm here.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we got a chance to take a look at Megan's call script. She actually built it in VoiceFlow, and this is her first time using VoiceFlow, so she did a great job. Um, what we wanted to do then was the rest of the team kind of took a look at it, and we wanted to make some minor usability adjustments. So we're working on those. We also want to add in some of these like incorrect intents, meaning what Megan did was she programmed in a lot of the happy path, if you will. So when the caller says something right, but when they say something wrong, that's not currently capturing that information yet. So we're got to program that in, and then also work on getting some XAPI statements and sending those, connecting it to the watershed LRS that we have.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Team Audio Video, is Jeremy on the line to give an update this week? Okay. Team Captivate JS Library, Brian Floyd, are you on the line to give an update for that team? Alrighty. Team Dragon Stats, Jonathan, are you on the line to give that update for that team? Alrighty. And Team Early Childhood Education, Joanne did reach out to me before the call and asked for me to read this. So the accomplishments this week is they met online to talk about the goals. They tested HTML assertions, the assertions form, and created and mastered statements for the 18-month competencies. Where they might need where they might need support is some feedback on their prototypes and what they're doing. What they want to accomplish in the next week is mapping competencies for the levels before and after to create sample data to work with. They're going to continue working on those assertions and continue working on Pebble and CAS implementation. All right. Team Interactive Video. Is anyone on the line for Team Interactive Video? Alrighty. Team Makey Makey. They have their link to their update. Brian, are you on the line to give this update? Or is anyone on the line to give the update? So their update is they're currently prototyping an XAPI response board with the Makey Makey based on a recent blog entry called Cashing In on Design Thinking. And they actually posted that. So this is a link to that article, but they also posted that in their Slack channel if you want to give that a look.
How about now?
All right. Oh, who's this?
That's Brian Duck.
Oh, go ahead. Do you want to give the update for Team Makey Makey?
You pretty much covered it. We are working on a prototype with the Makey Makey. I have a working board. Doug Hagee and I have been working through multiple meetings in the last couple weeks, and we've prototyped some questions, and I've actually attached them to a piece of whiteboard that is now wired up with a Makey to where we can gather feedback. And our next step is to build out the software to send the XAPI statements based on the feedback we're getting from the Makey. Thank you.
That's awesome. And Luke asked if you need any testers for that.
Yes, we do. If you join us on the Slack channel, there's actually links out to the GitHub. We have some beta software up there for testing the Makey at this point for Mac, Windows, and Linux. If you are able to test one of those platforms and give us some feedback, it would be appreciated. As we continue through the development cycle, we'll be putting out an update with the ability to send the XAPI statements, and we'll need some assistance with the testing that as well.
Awesome. Luke also asked if you can share any of those links in the chat for him.
Yep. I'll go ahead and do that.
Thanks, Brian.
If you want to continue on.
Awesome. Team mapping data for AI. Is anyone on the line to give an update for that team? Scott or anyone? Okay. Team Moodle plugins. Is anyone on the line to give an update for that team? Alrighty. Team Pebble, Kristen, are you on the line to give your update? Alrighty, last week was a slow week on their end, and Joanne from ECE kept chugging along. This week, they're going to get access to the InDesign plugin so that they'll be able to start designing Pebblebooks using that. What they're needing help with is Kristen brought her mom into the loop to get some child development information, but if anyone else is well versed in child development, specifically early childhood assessments, please let them know. That would be really helpful for their projects. Awesome. Team Podcast had a mini update. Is anyone, Sam or anyone on the line to give that update? Okay, so they had Anthony Altieri drop by their weekly meeting and help to clarify their approach and resolve some of the questions they had. So they're getting some support from folks and continuing to move along. Team SharePort LMS. Oh, sorry, Sam. Team SharePort LMS integration. Is anyone on the line to give that update? Stephanie or anyone? Okay, so the accomplishments for this week, they had access to SharePoint database. They created an overview deck of issues they're resolving for and how they'll attempt to solve it. There's no need for support at the moment. What they want to accomplish in the next week is building a recipe or profile for SharePoint XAPI. They want to analyze some SharePoint data. They want to identify XAPI statements from CSOD that are relevant, and they want to identify our reporting options and how reporting works. Alrighty, Team Sheets Zapier LRS. Is anyone on the line to give an update for that team? All right. Team Smart Builder.
Yes, hello, this is Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jason.
Fantastic. Yes, so we're making good progress towards proof of concepts. So a couple of weeks ago, we were successfully pushing XAPI data from a competency assessment that we built in Smart Builder into the Learning Locker Learning Record Store. And what we've done this last week is we now have managed to build an initial dashboard which starts to tell the story of competency and starts to visualize the data that we're pushing from the competency assessment. And we're starting just to learn the best way to do things, running up against the occasional barrier. So we're kind of in that iteration stage, really.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And our final team, Team Unity 3D, is Eric or anyone on the line to give an update on behalf of this team? Perfect. I see you, Eric. Can you, do you have mic access? Jamie, can you give Eric S. mic access so he can give the update?
Sorry about that. Now I'm back. Hello? This is Eric. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Eric. It's a little muted, so if you move a little closer or turn your mic volume up, it might be a little.
We'll try that. Can you hear me okay now?
Still a little muted.
Fine. Just checking really fast for you.
I think that sounds a little better.
Okay. I'll give you a really quick update. We've got the Unity 3D scene set up and working. From a discussion I had with David, we started talking about dice rolling, kind of a way to generate random numbers. So we have I have a set of dice, all the different shaped dice, polyhedra dice, and now I'm writing the XAPI statements to kind of give context to, let's just say, which actor rolls, which selected object, and a point value that it generates. So we can now start to keep track of certain users and what they're rolling on the dice. And then I discovered yesterday that it probably needs another variable of, of what do the points relate to, and so that goes into the context of the API statement, and just kind of doing the basic architecture, but using the dice really just as a metaphor to have something interactive to do in a 3D world that creates variability. And the next piece that I'm working on is something that tracks time, so we can have timers, basically a sand timer that'll run out if you don't do a certain task in a certain time frame, or just another way to work on the idea of time and tracking time through a statement. So what I'm doing next week, I'm having a meeting every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Kind of in our WebEx. So if you go to the chat, if you go to our channel, you'll see the WebEx link. And anyone's welcome to join with any level of Unity experience, from advanced to beginner, and just kind of observe. It's really more of a brainstorming session, and we'd love to see you there and see where we can take this Unity 3D space into XAPI territory. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. With that, I'm going to transition back to our classroom, and so just some quick good things to know before we hop off of this web session. We meet here every week at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. The link is there. We also send it via email on Friday in the weekly updates. We also send it in our Slack channel. It's also on our XAPI Gnome Twitter account right in the profile. So if you ever forget, that's how you get there. Next week we have more case studies by Richard Pedley with Fidelity International. So these are going to be great. And then again, a reminder, we have the XAPI party both in Michigan and online, and you can sign up with the link that's there. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me at jjackson@torrenslearning.com or message me in Slack, and I'll be able to help you out. So with that, I hope that you have a great Thursday, and get out there and continue making things.